So I'm starting today with a warning, and I think this is an important one. And this is a warning to my fellow do something leftists. You know, Trump talks about the do nothing left. I care about the do something left. I've always cared about getting things done. And the warning is as follows. Do not allow the right, and in particular, the Trumpian right, to make the next 3.5 months up until the presidential election about these culture war topics that they're increasingly trying to use to distract from the policy failures of this administration and to distract from the governance failures of this administration. Now, I'm including in this the Trump administration itself, Trumpists, but also the Republicans who maybe they're not vocally pro-Trump, but they've stood aside and allowed Donald Trump to do essentially whatever he wants. They've rubber stamped the judges. And to really understand this, we've got to do a little bit of homework. So first of all, when we talk about culture war, we're talking about cultural conflict. We're not talking about policy battles, right? We're talking about a battle over whose values are going to reign supreme. And these are also often, these culture war battles, they're often over issues where there's more disagreement than on policy. So on policy, we see on healthcare, on abortion, the country's nowhere near united, but there is much more support on one side. There's much less division as far as 50-50 division than we've seen in a long time. So I should remind you, there's a lot of right wingers and even so-called enlightened centrists who claim the left is waging a culture war and the right is just desperate to get a word in edgewise or something like that. That has never been less true than it is now. The right is fomenting a culture war specifically because they believe it will help them win in November, because they can't justify their re-elections in any other way because they've failed. So let's take the abortion example for a moment. For a long time, abortion was a hot button culture war issue. And over time, American opinion about abortion has become more and more on the side of, in most cases, abortion should be legal. That makes abortion less of an ideal issue with which to wage a culture war. Now, among evangelical conservative circles and in religious groups, being against abortion is still a pretty good way to raise money for your campaign. But abortion has become a less efficient way to polarize people to your advantage right now. Everything we're seeing when it comes to sports team names, Confederate flags, Confederate monuments, protesters being peaceful versus violent, and to what degree is it one or the other? And to what degree do we need to give police deference? These are all fomenting a culture war, which does not favor the left in this election cycle. Even coronavirus has actually become a culture war issue, specifically when it comes to masks as a proxy for this ideology of freedom and liberty and don't tread on me. There's actually a debate to be had over, for example, which statues should come down and which statues should stay up, which names should be cleansed from history and which should be allowed to stand. Reasonable people can disagree about, where is the line between taking down a statue or what constitutes an offensive sports team name. But the problem is that for the next 3.5 months, it is a complete distraction from policy and which policy platform we are voting for. Nobody gets health care if a George Washington statue stays up, but the Robert E. Lee statue comes down. Reasonable people can disagree, but that doesn't get anybody health care. The Washington Redskins changing their name does nothing to improve education in any way, but it allows the right wing to continue parroting this idea of woke leftist mobs spreading cancel culture. They are losing like they've never lost before on policy and governance, with the exception of getting a bunch of judges confirmed. And that also doesn't get enough attention while we're arguing about Confederate flags. Now, I've played clips for you over the last few days, weeks, where Donald Trump has been asked about his biggest first-term accomplishments and his second-term agenda, and he can barely answer those questions. That alone should disqualify Trump from a second term, but that gets less attention when they can make this about we're fighting a culture of Marxism, which of course doesn't exist, or cancel culture, or whatever they want to talk about. Now, where this gets difficult is that corporate media plays into this. Corporate media will stage these debates with people with particularly extreme positions on these issues, Person A says, keep every Confederate statue. Person B says, take down every statue, including George Washington, because he owned slaves. And it is wasted time. It's wasted time, number one, because most people don't hold such extreme views. Like most Americans, I think actually would be pretty reasonable. And they'd say, well, there's a difference between someone known for fighting to keep slavery in this country or else they will leave the Union versus George Washington is really known for other things, including saying we need a president, not a king, etc. And slavery was a sign of the times. It doesn't excuse slavery, but most people would understand the difference there. So the debates in media are set up with people with the most extreme views, and it only serves to distract from the historic failures we've seen from the current administration on coronavirus, on foreign policy, on education, on trade, on healthcare, etc. They win when the conversation is about flags and statues because it hides that they've face planted on every important issue for the last 3.5 years. So what we need to do is keep the focus on policy from now until November 3rd. Trump's polling has imploded for three major reasons: his handling of coronavirus, his handling of the economy in the context of coronavirus relative to other countries, and his insane reactions, his authoritarian reactions to the George Floyd protests. He's failed to deliver on just about every campaign promise. The United States is a global laughingstock. Those are the issues. We should talk about the failures there and Joe Biden as an alternative and put aside these cultural issues because they benefit from the discussion being about flags and statues rather than about their policy failures. So this next story is just more funny than anything else because we are obviously not going to see Donald Trump's tax returns. But remember how Donald Trump has been saying since 2015 that if it were up to him, he would show us his taxes, but they're under audit. If and when they're ever no longer under audit, he's going to release his tax returns. Now, that never made sense. Anybody who could think critically realized it never made sense because obviously not all of his recent tax returns would permanently be under audit. And of course, audits don't last years and years. But in any case, it was an excuse Trump gave for not showing his taxes. His personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, maybe it's his former personal attorney at this point, I don't know. He went on Fox News and he said, listen, there's got to be finality here. Trump's taxes have been audited and it's been closed and we're moving on. You can't now, again, Congress or investigators ask for Trump's taxes. He's indirectly saying we need a final point on this because the whole audit thing has been closed up. Well, if the audits are done, let's see the tax returns, right? Here is Rudy Giuliani himself saying it. They've been audited and it's fine. And these are now closed matters as far as he's concerned.
Could make the argument that they have no particularized need for it. You could also make the argument that they are not investigating any particularized crime. They have no reason to believe that there's anything wrong with his tax returns. I mean, all these tax returns have been, by and large, maybe not the last one, but all of them have been audited. All of them have been either passed on or settled. And there should be some finality in your tax returns. In other words, we get audited, we make a deal, we pay the government. You don't come after me forever for that. And also, this is the President of the United States. There are literally 4,000 prosecutors who can now come after his records. I don't think the court ever thought of that.
All these tax returns have been audited and there should be finality. Rudy says, you know, you get audited, you make a deal, and that's it. He is saying there that the issue of the tax returns is over because Trump is no longer under audit and he has moved on. He's saying you do the audit ends and that's it. You don't keep looking at the same returns that have been audited. He's admitting that the audits are done if they ever existed. Now, maybe even more interesting there is Rudy saying Trump's audits aren't just done, but they've been settled. When Rudy says that they've been settled, it implies, again, you know, talk about self-inflicted damage. You settle audits and pay fines when you've done something wrong on your tax returns. And Rudy Giuliani there, again, just as an aside, seems to say, not only are the audits done, but they've been resolved. Sometimes, you know, you pay a fine and you move on, which seems to be an admission that Donald Trump has been deceptive enough on his tax returns. You know, you can always claim it was a mistake, but that he has had to pay fines or make good or settle with the IRS when it comes to his taxes. It's stunning that this is not getting more attention. It's stunning that a lot of people used to respect Rudy Giuliani. And again, the reminder is we're not going to see the tax returns, right? To be super clear, Trump was never going to release the tax returns. The Supreme Court's decision isn't going to get them released before the election. And the important thing for us is we don't need to see them to know how to vote in November. It's not like we're saying, you know, I on one hand, I don't like these things Trump has done. And on the other hand, this wasn't so bad. But if I could only see the tax returns, I'd be able to decide what to do in November. Take solace in that even though we're not going to see Trump's tax returns, we don't really need to. We already know what we should be doing in November when it comes to Trump versus Biden. And I think that's if you're looking for any positive takeaway from any of this, it's we've got enough information to know how to vote in November without seeing Donald Trump's tax returns. Tonight, join me at 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook for the third ever David Pakman Show chess tournament. I'll be playing and streaming. Anybody can play. Community event, no cost to play, no barrier to entry. It's completely free. Just register at davidpakman.com/chess. That's tonight to Tuesday, July 14th, 8 p.m. Eastern. I will see you then. And of course, remember that you can get the daily audio podcast every single day, right around 3 p.m. Eastern, on whatever is your favorite podcasting app: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Podbean, if you will. Anyway, wherever you want to hear it, you can hear it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are James Markham and Jeff Sulik. Thank you so much, James and Jeff, for your support. And also a big thank you to today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Christina Pacias has been a member for almost 5 years and is the sustainer of the day. Thank you so much, Christina. Grab a membership, support the show, get the daily bonus show and all of these other great perks by signing up in mere seconds at joinpakman.com. So we've got to get back to this Anthony Fauci story. Yesterday, in 24 hours, this has completely exploded. Yesterday, I told you that increasingly Donald Trump is listening to people other than doctors, I guess we would say. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the chief infectious disease doctor of the United States, who's been working with presidents for 40 years in the United States, worked on the AIDS epidemic, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Fauci revealed that he had not even spoken to Donald Trump for what now would be about 5 weeks, and that he has not briefed Donald Trump on coronavirus in a serious manner for 2 months. I also told you yesterday that the White House has put out a list of things that Fauci got wrong in order, I guess, to discredit him. So clearly it was going bad. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has retweeted Chuck Woolery. And this is continuing to escalate. I'll get to the Woolery thing momentarily, but in just the 24 additional hours since yesterday's show, there now seems to be a war. This is crazy. Not between the White House and the virus. That's the war. If you want to apply war language here, it should be us versus the virus. There seems to be a war between the White House and the government's own top infectious disease doctor, Anthony Fauci. Fauci just seems to be doing medical stuff, and the world is, again, crying and laughing because the White House is going after not the virus, they're going after Fauci. Dr. Fauci, good for him, is no longer mincing words. He said very clearly, the reason cases are exploding is because we never completely shut down and we're doing the wrong things. States that really came down were fully shut down and stayed closed longer. Others opened too early. Here's the full quote from Dr. Fauci. We did not shut down entirely, and that's the reason why we went up. We started to come down, and then we plateaued at a level that was really quite high, about 20,000 infections a day. Then as we started to reopen, we're seeing the surges that we're seeing today as we speak. We made a set of guidelines a few months ago. Unfortunately, it did not work very well for us. We can get a handle on that. I am really confident we can if we step back. Understand that to avoid having to fully shut down again, which it looks like some states are starting to do, you have to pull back for a while. You have to really limit things. What is going to turn around the case explosion in Arizona, Texas, California, and Florida if you don't shut down? California has extended a shutdown to 30 counties now, including LA County. In 6 weeks, hopefully, we will see the positive effect of that. It takes a while. These other states are barely doing a thing. What will turn it around? The heat hasn't turned it around. Whatever else they said was going to turn it around has not. Meanwhile, instead of working with Dr. Fauci, the White House is now fully on the offensive against Dr. Fauci, the guy who worked 40 years under Republican and Democratic presidents whose ideology is health. He is the target of Trump's attack. He is the target of the White House's opposition research. The White House released a document to media outlets meant to make Dr. Fauci look untrustworthy with a list of things Fauci got wrong. Notice Trump got wrong in April. In March, actually, we have 15 cases, which will soon be 0. Fauci is reportedly referred to by some at the White House as Dr. Doom and Gloom. Apparently, Fauci is not pleasant enough about 140,000 people dying. Fauci isn't upbeat about 60 to 70,000 new cases a day. Another report alleges that Donald Trump is reportedly rattled by the fact that the country continues to trust Dr. Fauci more than they trust Trump on coronavirus. We talk about ignorance in this country a lot. The country doesn't seem so ignorant that they would trust the reality show host president over Dr. Fauci on matters of infectious disease. And part of this is we know Trump doesn't like anybody else getting positive attention. But it gets even crazier because Donald Trump's director of social media, Dan Scavino, posted a pejorative cartoon about Dr. Fauci that refers to him as Dr. Faucet who wants to turn off the faucet on everything, so to speak. So they're essentially attacking Dr. Fauci, I guess because he's being too cautious. Essentially, the White House seems to be attacking Dr. Fauci for not being more fun about 140,000 U.S. deaths, a number that in all likelihood in the next few days is going to start accelerating more quickly as we saw it do during the weekdays last week. The White House has gone to war, not with the virus, but with the doctor fighting the virus. So what I think we have to do is we have to step back here. Recognize that this is part of the anti-intellectualism in this country, where you can only trick the population into continuing to just live a completely normal life as if nothing is going on when you have a lot of uneducated and uninformed and ignorant people. And while on the one hand, it's good that Dr. Fauci is still more trusted than Trump because the virus spreads virally, even if only 15, 20, 25, 30% of the country thinks it's fine to just do whatever the hell you want, that's enough to perpetuate one of the worst trajectories when it comes to cases in the world. Now, secondly, the idea that we've just had too much shutdown, we can't tolerate it anymore. Recall that many states never shut down fully because there was no national shutdown. Trump insists, I shut it down and now I'm opening it back up. Trump never shut it down. It was states that decided what they had to do, and many of them barely shut down. We might now actually need a national shutdown if things don't turn around. We're going to talk also later today about Trump's failings in terms of polling in Texas. But once again, this could have been a political windfall for Donald Trump. He just had to say, listen, we're in it together. Listen to the doctors. It's going to be tough, but this is what we have to do. I trust the doctors. Let's do what they say. We'd be better off. Fewer people would have died. Donald Trump would be cruising to re-election right now. Very different scenario 5 months into coronavirus that we actually see. And now Donald Trump has been relegated to retweeting conspiracy theories from game show hosts. Let's talk about that next. So Donald Trump is the perennial victim, according to him, right? He is now retweeting the conspiracy theory from former Love Connection host Chuck Woolery that his own CDC is lying about coronavirus in order to hurt Trump's chances at re-election. Now, I don't know about you. I'm sick and tired of Trump constantly being the victim. Guy who's been wealthy his whole life, was handed a business thanks to his dad's money, is president of the U.S. From his rhetoric, you would believe that he was the biggest victim there is, except he's the most privileged person there is. And now there's a conspiracy theory which was put on Twitter to start with by former game show host Chuck Woolery. Trump retweeted it, and the way it goes is, quote, "The most outrageous lies are the ones about COVID-19. Everyone is lying. The CDC, media, Democrats, doctors, not all but most, that we are told to trust. I think it's all about the election and keeping the economy from coming back, which is about the election. I'm sick of it." Then Trump retweeting about this issue of opening schools. Also what Chuck Woolery said, quote, "There is so much evidence, yes, scientific evidence, that schools should open this fall. It's worldwide and it's overwhelming, but no." We have a medical situation, a global 100-year pandemic, and you have a reality TV show host, president, amplifying the messages of the former host of the TV show Love Connection. And what they are amplifying are messages that run directly counter to what medical experts are saying. The U.S. keeps breaking its own record for new cases in a single day. The death toll is around 140,000. Remember, Trump said once it would be 60,000, maybe 70,000. Do you get why the world is laughing at us, but also increasingly crying instead of laughing? We've handled the virus as close to as badly as any country out there. And in the midst of 60 to 70,000 new cases a day, a reality TV host president retweets a game show host Republican as if they know more than the medical community. I told you earlier, the White House has released what is essentially opposition research on Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Trump is, instead of standing with the doctors, standing with Chuck Woolery. We are a global laughingstock, and this is why I said earlier, we can't allow them to turn the next 3.5 months into statues and flags. This is the red alert failure. Now, in terms of the list of things Fauci got wrong and why Trump is increasingly retweeting Chuck Woolery and not Fauci. Fauci got masks wrong. That's right. Fauci got asymptomatic spread wrong. Fauci has corrected himself. But Trump said in February, our 15 cases will soon be 0. He hasn't apologized. He's not admitted fault. Trump said in February, case numbers are going to go down, not up. He was wrong. Trump said in March, we have the virus under control. We didn't. Trump said in April, what about injecting bleach and isopropyl alcohol? You get the picture. So this is very, very dangerous talk. The maskless followers are making it worse. Just look at what's happening in Florida. Look at what's happening in Arizona, arguably the 2 worst places in the world to be right now. I don't know what we need to change people's minds. Like, do we need video of ICUs so people see what it is that happens and what's going on? Will they understand graphic video, some of these folks? I don't know. But what we know is we've got to remove him. We have 3.5 months to go. And at this point, Chuck Woolery, we'll have more about this on the show's Instagram page, David Pakman Show on Instagram.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Dan Harris. He's the author of Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics and also the book 10% Happier, which I read a couple years ago, I think, at this point. He's also an ABC News anchor who, I hate to say, Dan, you're known for anything in particular, but you came to mindfulness after what I guess we now have determined was a panic attack on air some years ago.
That's exactly right. I don't mind being known for it, at least not now that I've kind of reframed it. If it was just Dan Harris known for freaking out on the air, full stop, that would kind of suck. But the panic attack led me in a weird and windy way to meditation, which has been incredibly valuable to me. But the story of the panic attack basically is that I was on the air on Good Morning America one warm June morning of 2004 and found myself unable to speak, which is inconvenient if you want to anchor the news. And after the panic attack, I went to a doctor who asked me a bunch of questions. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs?
Right.
And I said, yeah. And the story there is that I had spent a lot of time as a young, ambitious correspondent in war zones after 9/11. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd come home, gotten depressed, and I didn't even know I was depressed, and then blindly self-medicated with recreational drugs. And even though I wasn't high on the air, and I wasn't even doing drugs that frequently, was enough to change my brain chemistry per this doctor. And so that was a big wake-up call for me and had a lot of positive impact.
And so when this happened, when the actual acute incident happened, you believe that it was because of it wasn't the stress of being on air or the fear of having a problem speaking on air that perpetuated it. It was just sort of how the stress that was going on elsewhere in your life manifested.
I think for me, there had been and still is a baseline amount of nerves when it comes to speaking publicly.
Right.
So, but the changes to my brain chemistry just made my ability to manage the underlying nerves much worse.
And when people don't understand what it means to have a panic attack, because to a lot of people who don't get it, it seems like, well, hold on, you just tell yourself you're fine and then that's it, and it just recenter in that way. That's not the way it works.
No. I wish. Panic you can think about as just a malfunction of the very useful fight or flight impulse that we all have, which we evolved for. Often when we came face to face with a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, the brain was flooded with adrenaline. The body had the heart starts to race. There are a lot of very evolutionarily sound things that happen in the body that prepare us to fight or run away. In our modern context, we're often having this fight or flight impulse triggered to one extent or another inappropriately in traffic, in a meeting with our boss, while on social media, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't always escalate to a panic attack, but it can create background levels of stress that are really corrosive to our health. In extreme cases, when you have panic disorder, as I do, it can result in a full-on panic attack where it runs away. It enters into a kind of vicious cycle where the body is having this response. The mind freaks out in response to the body's response. The body then gets worse. The mind gets worse. The body gets worse. The mind gets worse. And off we go into out of the zone of stress and into the zone of panic.
I want to be careful in how I ask this question, and this applies to me as much as it applies to you, but how much of a predisposition to this could be, I don't know if I want to say cultural listen, Jewish neuroticism is something that in my family, right? I mean, I think you know what I'm getting at here, which is there's a lot about upbringing. There's a lot about expectations. There's all of this baggage that people tend to arrive as adults with that comes from earlier in life. Could there be cultural components to predisposition to some degree?
Look, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm half Jewish. I was raised, my dad's Jewish, my mother's a WASP, and it's a little bit like that movie Annie Hall, if you've ever seen Woody Allen in that movie. And so my dad had an expression that he used, which was the price of security is insecurity, which is just kind of a veneration of anxiety. And, for a variety of reasons, anxiety is quite common among Jewish people. I think there may be something very powerful to the argument that historic persecution can lead to a hypervigilance, and that gets handed down intergenerationally. So I think there's a lot going on there. Plus, you have the Jewish cultural trait of really wanting to be successful. And so I think if you combine all of that, which by the way was there on the other side of on the non-Jewish side of my family tree as well. And by the way, if you look at my family tree, it's just filled with a lot of people who have depression and or addiction. So it's a pretty ripe environment in my case for, freaking out.
There's a debate that exists, and I've interviewed people on both sides of it, including speaking to folks like Johan Hari, who has written about anxiety and depression anyway. There's this debate about like how much of this is physiological, how much of it is something that has become more common because of sort of Western society that includes, it doesn't have to be just apps and phones, it doesn't have to be getting ahead or keeping up with the Joneses, but sort of like this package of realities that exist. Do you have any insight into that from what you've experienced? Are these all factors, maybe to different degrees for different people?
Yeah, I like Johan Hari. I've had him on my podcast, and as I understand, I'm going to try to. And my apologies to Johan if I reproduce his thesis unfaithfully, but
Yeah.
my understanding is his argument is yes, there are physiological genealogical factors that can contribute to things like depression. But the way we've structured society, he argues, is actually perhaps an even bigger contributor. He talks about junk values. We have junk food. We also have junk values, and the value of individualism, which he argues we've taken too far in Western culture, where it's all about the myth of the rugged individual, divorced from the incredible wellspring of interconnection and human relationship and community. And when community withers, when our emphasis on relationships withers, we get stuck in loneliness and solipsism, and that can lead to depression. And in my case, I would say it's all of that.
I want to get to the meditation piece and mindfulness piece in a second, but a couple other things just to touch on first. So all these videos now are going viral of, the stuff, the Costco's and the people saying they're not going to wear masks and confrontations that are just completely horrifying in a number of different ways. And like politics, I have my political view of it, but then also politics aside, this is just clear. These are people who are not in a good place in a bunch of different ways, more than likely, that go beyond just your view about masks. Do you see any of the panic type elements in some of these rants where people seem to be almost like outside of their own bodies, acting in ways that they claim they never have in public settings?
I see so much in this in these videos. I see the panic, or sort of being hijacked by the reptilian folds of your brain, by the what's called the amygdala, the stress center of the brain. So I see that. I see again this myth of individualism where we don't have any responsibility to our neighbors, and I see a kind of twisting of masculinity, because in particular, at least one study shows that men are more likely to resist mask wearing than women. And I don't know how I feel about the term toxic masculinity, just because I feel like it sometimes gets used in a really finger wagging way, and I'm not big on finger wagging. But I do think that we are due for a rethink of masculinity, which has often been, rejecting what anybody tells me what to do, rejecting being in touch with your emotions. And in fact, this idea, and I say this as a guy who never wanted to be in touch with his emotions ever at all, and had thought it was just annoying and disgusting, we shouldn't talk about it. But in fact, emotions are there nonetheless. They are non-negotiable. They are physiological. I would argue that the baller thing to do, the most manly thing to do, is to actually tune into the chaos of your own mind so that you are not owned by it. And in that process, if you were to look at your shame, your vanity, your selfishness, and be okay with it, have a warmer relationship to your own ugliness, which we all have, you would wear a mask.
Right. And it seems like this is now, I want to start to get into the path into mindfulness and meditation, but in getting to where you eventually get or describe being at the end of the book 10% happier, you talk about this journey through, the sort of woo that is inherent in some of these fields, and healing and wellness and all of this different stuff, and what I would consider scammers, although I don't know that you necessarily use that word in the book. Is that, I mean, from if you don't know anything about meditation and mindfulness, and you've just kind of gotten two pictures of it. One is that's for girly men, so to speak, to take a kind of meme that spreads, or it's woo. You would probably be predisposed to resist it as many people do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's probably why, no, not probably, that is certainly why I was rejecting it initially, because as I often say, meditation has been the victim of the worst marketing campaign for anything ever. The traditional art around the traditional depictions of meditation, show people sitting on, top of a mountaintop, on top of a mountain, wearing loincloth with a beatific look on their face, et cetera, et cetera. That is not the experience of meditation for most people that I know. For most people that I know, you can think about meditation as a kind of exercise for the brain and for the mind, where you are training the mind in certain skills. And the animating insight for me, the thing I'm about to tell you, which was electrifying for me, which is why I've been doing this practice personally for more than a decade, and writing books about it, and having a podcast on it, and having a meditation app, and blah blah blah. The reason I do all of this is because what the science is showing us, the scientific research into people who meditate, is that the mind and the brain are trainable, that you are not stuck with your characteristics like factory settings that are unalterable, that happiness, compassion, generosity, connection, these are all skills that can be trained. And that is a radical and empowering notion.
One of the things that I wonder if you would agree can be tough for people is everybody wants results, and you want to feel and see results. But this is like a really slow moving thing. It's sort of like, start a glacier moving a couple of inches a year or something like that. And I wonder if in your experience, people abandon their practice because from day to day or even month to month, it doesn't really feel like that much is necessarily changing.
Yeah, I think this is a big issue. So it is both slow and it's not. So, for example, I've had this, when my book first came out 6 years ago, my first book came out 6 years ago, I started saying this thing, which was meditate for a month every day or daily-ish. And if by the end of that time you see no benefit, send me a note on Twitter and tell me I'm a moron.
Right.
But people tell me I'm a moron all the time.
Right. But for other reasons, maybe.
Yes, never that. And so I do think that if you do it consistently for a few weeks or a few months, you will notice that your inner weather becomes balmier. You're not so yanked around by this inner conversation that you are having with yourself, which if we broadcast aloud, you would be locked up.
Right.
Most of us aren't even aware that we have this inner narrator, this malevolent puppeteer that's, giving us terrible ideas all the time. So I actually do think you can derive some of the advertised benefits of meditation, self-awareness, calm, compassion, focus in a few weeks. But that's slower than the gym. And over time, it's very easy to get into this mire where you're thinking, oh, okay, I've been doing this for a year, but what have my results been in the last 6 months? And yes, and that is when people do fall off. And I actually think there are some salutary effects from falling off. Because when I stop meditating for a couple of days, I notice that my inner atmosphere becomes much more toxic, and that I'm much less likely to be able to fend off the terrible ideas served up to me by my inner narrator, like, eat the 75th Oreo, or say the thing that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of your marriage, or whatever. And so I actually find that there is real benefit to falling off sometimes.
So in terms of the simple practice, people, you don't need to pay someone to give you a mantra. You don't need any specialized equipment. I mean, for to start, it's really just about, I mean, you can talk about how you did it, but it's just making a habit of sitting for 10 minutes a day, essentially.
Yeah, so you should take what I say on this score with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I am co-proprietor of a meditation app. So I do believe that there is some utility to subscribing to meditation apps, but you don't need to use an app. So there are several ways you can get started.
And importantly, you didn't start with one.
I did not. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I started meditating before apps were a thing.
Right.
Well, at least before meditation apps were a thing.
Yeah.
It's 2009, I think. I read a book, or I read a series of books, but I think the book, the proximate cause for my actually sitting down and starting to meditate, was a book by a former molecular biologist by the name of John Kabat-Zinn, called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And he described the basic steps of mindfulness meditation. Excuse me. He described the basic steps of mindfulness meditation very clearly. 1, sit in a reasonably comfortable place and close your eyes. 2, bring your full attention to the feeling of your breath coming in and going out. 3, whenever you get distracted, start again. Not super complicated. Now, it can get really interesting and complex in nice ways from there, hence the utility of reading books or finding an in-person teacher, which is hard to do during a pandemic, or using an app. But the basic instructions, which I did on my own for at least a year before I finally went on a meditation retreat, are, you could take what I just told you and go for it.
Yep, and that book is sort of the classic. That is the entryway for so many people.
Yeah.
John Kabat-Zinn, teaching for a long time, right down the road from us in Worcester, Massachusetts. In fact, at UMass Medical Center in Worcester. Dan Harris, author of Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics and the book 10% Happier. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, Dan.
Thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Whether you're looking for David Pakman Show coffee for your Chemex or French press, or a David Pakman Show t-shirt, it's all available on our website, shipping to anywhere in the world at davidpakman.com/gear. Don't miss the bumper stickers too. davidpakman.com/gear.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's really no other way to introduce this next clip other than to tell you that when asked about the exploding coronavirus pandemic in the United States yesterday, Donald Trump said Obama and Biden stopped testing. We're going to try to figure out what he meant, but this is a man who is disintegrating. This is a man who has collapsed. This is a man who really has nothing that he can say because he has so mishandled coronavirus that he's just muttering the name of his predecessor at this point. And is this another brain glitch? Is this Trump trying to come up with some new excuse as to why he failed on the virus? And, we've joked that Donald Trump is going to blame Obama for his coronavirus failures. And he sort of has, when Trump says the cupboards were bare, that he means we didn't have ventilators or PPE when Trump became president. Now, of course, that's not true, but it's a weird critique because Trump had 3 years of presidency before coronavirus hit, during which he could have refilled those cupboards. But putting that aside, in this clip, Trump is asked by CBS News reporter and friend of the David Pakman Show, Weijia Jiang, asked about the cases exploding, and Trump looks terrible, and he says, well, Obama and Biden stopped testing. Take a look.
President Trump, you've said many times that the number of coronavirus cases is going up because testing is increasing.
That's right.
Do you acknowledge that it's going up for other reasons too? For example, that it's actually spreading? And what are you going to do to stop the spread?
Well, you know that we have one of the lowest mortality rates anywhere. If you know Biden and Obama stopped their testing, they just stopped it. You probably know that. I'm sure you don't want to report it. But they stopped testing. Right in the middle, they just went, no more testing. And on a much lesser problem than the problem that we have, obviously, with respect to this is the worst thing that's happened since probably 1917. This is a very bad thing. All over the world, it's 188 countries right now.
Biden and Obama stopped their testing. What is he talking about? In the middle of what? Like, what is he actually referring to? Did Trump mean to say that? Was it some kind of mental glitch? And I've been trying to be as charitable as possible. Like, what does he mean that Obama and Biden stopped Ebola testing in 2014? That's when we had 4 cases and 2 deaths. The Ebola pandemic in the United States, it wasn't even a pandemic globally, but it was an outbreak. In the US, it was 4 cases and 2 deaths. Is that what he's talking about? Obama and Biden stopped testing for something we had 4 cases of? Was he maybe referring to H1N1, which of course was dramatically different and everything about that? Like, what is Trump talking about? And in fact, yesterday he was particularly incoherent during this event. Here he is repeating, they're buying over and over again. Just another futile attempt by Donald Trump to use language.
China phase 1 deal still intact, or is it? Do you see it in jeopardy?
It's intact. It's intact. But I think what China has done to the world with what took place, the China plague, you can call it the China virus, you can call it whatever you want to call it. It's about 20 different names. What they did to the world should not be forgotten. But it's intact. They're buying. Whether they buy or not, that's up to them. They're buying.
Very sloppy. And, we said before when Trump aced the Montreal cognitive assessment that it's no big deal. In watching this video, I'm questioning whether he really could ace it. I mean, this is a very damaged individual here. Does Trump know what city he's in when he's answering these questions? Because this is bizarre behavior. It can't be allowed to continue, and it might unless we all get out and vote. And that's what I need to talk to you about next. Donald Trump's nightmare is now potentially a reality. He is in a statistical tie with Joe Biden in the red state of Texas in an election which really could go either way in Texas. Now, I obviously don't have to tell you, if Joe Biden were to win Texas, this will be a historic defeat for Donald Trump. This will be like something we've not seen in a very long time in American politics. But I also shouldn't have to tell you by now, but I will, that nothing is certain and everyone must vote. So in one new poll from Texas, from the Dallas Morning News, Joe Biden is now leading by 5, 48-43. Now that's leaving 9% in the third party or undecided bucket. And they could break for the incumbent Donald Trump between now and November, and they may well do that. If you look at the averages of recent polling in Texas, it's not as bad for Trump. In the Real Clear Politics average, it's just a tie. In the 538 average, Trump is ahead by 0.1%. So understand that these are blended averages looking at recent polls. I don't know that the exact numbers are so important. Like, if it's a tie in Texas versus if Trump's winning by 0.1 or if Trump or Biden are winning by 1, the point is it's close in Texas. And the story is the trend line. 3-4 months ago at the start of the pandemic, 5 months ago now, Trump was solidly ahead in every Texas poll by about 5 points. That lead has evaporated into what is now, listen, we can just say it's tight in Texas. Now, if you say to me, David, you've got to bet money who wins Texas in November, I'm still betting Trump wins Texas. And in fact, if you look at the betting market, 64% of people are still betting that Donald Trump wins the state of Texas. But 64% is actually quite low historically, because the last time that a Democratic presidential candidate won in Texas was Jimmy Carter in 1976. That's 44 years ago. So this could be a historic defeat for Donald Trump, or Trump might suppress just enough of the vote, lie and claim just enough of an accomplishment, I guess, on coronavirus or the economy to convince just enough people to vote for him. Just enough people might end up deciding to stay home if vote by mail isn't happening in their state and they feel that it's dangerous to their health to go out and vote. And he could squeak out another electoral win. Now, I want to be crystal clear about something here. The nightmare of Trump getting crushed in November will be nothing for him compared to the nightmare that he has subjected the United States and the world to for the last 3.5 years. And Trump may not have the nightmare of losing in November if we don't go vote and we get voters registered and we make sure that everybody votes. So this is the daily or weekly reminder. You've got to vote no matter what. Ask your friends if they are voting and encourage them to do so. We do not want 2016 all over again. Now, Texas is interesting for another reason. Texas is a story as much about gerrymandering as it is about Donald Trump not doing well. When you look at the districts, Texas is red. There's no denying it. But Texas is much less red than many other states. So, for example, Hillary Clinton got 43% of the vote in 2016 in Texas, 43% of the vote. For comparison, here in Massachusetts, Donald Trump only got 32% of the vote. So to put it a different way, Hillary Clinton's support in Texas was more than a third larger than Trump's support here in Massachusetts. Texas is much more purple than many other states that are considered solid red states. The thing about Texas is that it is hugely gerrymandered. And when you look at the House reality in the U.S. House of Representatives, when you look at the districts within Texas at the state level, the gerrymandering that has gone on there is responsible for Texas seeming much more red than it actually is, because 43% for the Democratic candidate in a state that is considered to be one of the reddest of red. Texas is increasingly purple. You look at places like Austin and other cities, it is a changing landscape. And let's see what we can do in 2020 to make it maybe the start of Texas being a swing state, Texas being a battleground state, which would be terrible at a systemic level for Republicans, as we've talked about many, many times. But assume nothing. Imagine that your one vote could be the deciding vote in your state. If you knew that could be the case, you would sure as hell go out and vote. We've got an interesting voicemail today. The phone number to call is 219-2-DAVID-P. This voicemail has what I guess is now the requisite podcast playing in the background. Pause the show to call in. Remember, you can just hit pause and then call me and then resume. But in any case, you'll hear my voice in the background. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, David, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on if President Trump was to lose the election and he doesn't want to leave office? What do we do?
Listen, don't worry about that. Okay, there's a couple different things there. Number one, don't put the cart before the horse. Let's defeat Trump first before we worry about whether he'll leave office. That's the most important thing, because if we focus too much on what will happen if Trump refuses to leave office, Trump might get himself reelected, and we don't want that. That's number one. So just go vote. Number two, if Donald Trump loses in November, on January 21st, 2021, he will no longer be the president of the United States. He just will not be the president. Okay, that's the way that it is written in the law. And I am not particularly worried about Donald Trump successfully not turning over power to Joe Biden if he loses in November. I do believe Trump will claim that it was rigged. I do believe that it is likely that many Trumpists could be moved to get on the streets, possibly with guns, if Donald Trump convinces them that it was rigged and that really Donald Trump won. I believe all of that could well happen. But Trump will leave because he will not be the president anymore on January 21st. Now, I know that there are some hypotheses floating around. Here's what Trump could do to prevent this from going to Joe Biden in January, if indeed he were to lose. Most of those scenarios actually lead to the Speaker of the House becoming president. It's important to understand. It doesn't mean there is not some hypothetical scenario that you could dream up of some way Trump could remain in the White House. Don't worry about voting right now. Okay, that's the important thing. We've got 3.5 months until November. Let's win first. Then we'll have 2.5 more months to make sure Donald Trump vacates the White House. And we'll deal with that after November 3rd if that comes up. Let's just leave it there. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We are going to talk about the U.S. budget deficit. Where are the deficit hawks? They're very, very quiet as the U.S. budget deficit has hit another all-time high. Disney World is also offering mask-free relaxation zones. I will discuss how much would I have to be paid to go to Disney World right now. Not how much would I pay. Would I go with it? How much would I have to be paid to go? And we are also going to talk about China announcing some sanctions against Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, 2 Republican senators, retaliatory sanctions against them. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Don't miss it. Become a member at joinpacman.com.